So if you run meta ads for your e-commerce business, I'm going to go through exactly what not to do when it comes to your audience targeting. Okay, so if you don't know me, my name is Will De Bruin. I co-founded an e-commerce business in 2013 with my brother. We started from the kitchen bench, having left our corporate jobs, and that business has now gone on to multiple 7 figures per year. And I also help other e-com brands scale to record revenue amounts. I've helped over 250 at this point in time. So typically people will be running their own meta ads, which we absolutely advocate for. You need to know exactly what's going to work for your business. You need to bootstrap it where it's necessary, and then only outsource when you have the financial means and the lack of time to do so. Otherwise, obviously bring it in-house or do it yourself. But when it comes to meta ads, audience targeting is one of the most common things that people, I guess, faff over, right? They really kind of obsess over, or they really get anxious about. And it was really a few years ago that it was actually important. I'd say a number of years. I'd say back in, I was running ads since basically 2013, 2014, and I actually helped over, I think, 100 odd brands in about a 3-year span from sort of 2018, 19 to kind of 2022 or 3. Okay, so there was a crossover period there in about 2021 or 2 when Apple changed its privacy changes. It updated to iOS 14, and that's when Meta and all these other platforms had a lack of access to data through the privacy setting changes. That's the bigger picture. At that point in time, there was a big shift in how data was obviously collected and what data was being available to use. Prior to that period of time, audience targeting was very important because there were so many touch points. Meta has, 55,000 touch points in every single person's profile. Being able to target someone very specifically and granularly was possible and very, very, very effective. And so you could literally say this person in this town with this personality with this income that was an engaged shopper, which means that they bought, recently because they had that data. I want to target those people. But now, or really when those changes actually occurred, it basically changed the game, right? Suddenly the shackles were off in who they could actually target, meaning that they couldn't actually pinpoint those people specific. At least there was a delayed fuse with how that data was actually collected, right? So if it dropped off at the 30th of June, there was a few months, even 6 months there where it could still track people's behaviors, but then it got less effective obviously as time went on. And now a few years on, we've found that detailed targeting is way off the table. You shouldn't be using detailed targeting at all, really, unless you're doing a broad interest-based that will go to people or point it in the right direction if it's, say, a new account. Now, even that, we recommend and basically take Meta's endorsements that you should be running Advantage Plus campaigns anyway. But if you were split testing between Advantage Plus and the performance with, say, a manual campaign, which is where we do interest-based and various other things, then you would look at a very broad, even interest-based targeting that is basically just your industry. So if you're selling soaps, it's going to be like interested in soap, right? If it's skincare, it's interested in skincare. You don't get too complex and keep it nice and broad so that Meta can really continue to do its thing. We know that the ad itself is what does the heavy lifting, calls out the audience, all right? So that's kind of just a bit of an overview of where audience targeting has sort of gone over the last few years. Now, one thing that I got asked just the other day in the community from a client was actually around lookalike audiences. So to explain what lookalike audiences are, it basically means that you have a seed data set. So think of, say, your database, and you can input that into Meta and say, hey, I want to find people like this database, right? So you might have 1,000 people in that database and say, I want to find people like that. That's what a lookalike audience is. So Meta will actually go out and find, I think every per percent, right, goes on a percentage basis, is about 180,000 people. So here's 1,000 people, go and find 180,000 people like that, or create an audience based off of that, which is called a lookalike audience. Now you can create it off any seed audience you want, right? It could be a database, it could be Instagram following, it could be your website visitors, it could be people who added to cart, it could be people who have purchased before based off your pixel data. So it's extremely powerful in terms of the source that it actually uses. In our experience, you want to be further up the chain, the furthest up the chain you possibly can. So purchases is ideal. Obviously, we want to find more people like our purchases. Okay. So pre 2021 or 22, when these changes came in, lookalike audience was probably the most powerful, evidence-based, most powerful audiences you could use because it was so capable of going after people with the same interests and the same attributes as these people. But post that, it's actually become one of the least effective ways of targeting people, interest-based targeting, okay? And so the answer to the question of one of my clients on the call was basically use it as almost like a last resort, or as a testing capability, and only use it if you're able to create the audience which is based on purchases, past purchases. Okay, so again, I mentioned you can do database, I mentioned you can do website visitors, Instagram following. You want to do it as close to purchases as you possibly can, because even people who've added to cart is going to be quite a broad audience, quite a big audience, quite a sometimes irrelevant audience. And so you want purchases as much as possible. Now, you won't be able to produce that. Technically, it says if you've had less than 100 purchases go through the pixel data, but in my experience, it's sometimes more. It doesn't tell you, it just says you can't actually create the audience. Okay, so then you're going to have to go back down the funnel. So initiate checkout, added to cart, viewed content, website visitors, for example, which gets pretty broad, to be honest with you, when you're going from a source of 1,000 to say 180,000. And so I guess my big recommendation for this little video is you can test it for sure, but just don't burn cash unnecessarily doing and filtering and targeting a lookalike audience unnecessarily. That's basically what I'm saying with this. You go for Advantage Plus first and foremost, then you go for a broad interest-based audience if you're doing manual campaigns. And then if you really wanted to see the impact of lookalike audiences, then you could go and do that. But it would be purely a test, purely to see how it goes. Now, I've been proven wrong plenty of times, but I'll say in our experience and extensive testing experience and continued extensive experience of testing, that it's performed worse than the other campaign structures and audience targeting features. Okay, so that's my stance on kind of lookalike audiences. It's worth a shot, but only as a nice to have or let's just try this out basically standpoint. Okay, don't put any money into these audiences that you can't afford to lose. Let's just say that. So that's what I just wanted to talk about. I wanted to say basically don't have your ads campaign set up incorrectly. Firstly, take the shackles off, start with Advantage Plus, start with an ad that's actually going to call out your audience. It's going to be interesting to people, to your audience, and Meta will do the rest of the work. It is working so much faster, so much harder than we could ever possibly comprehend, that we just need to give it the right inputs from a ad perspective, product perspective, pricing perspective, everything to do with your foundations of your business. Just give it the inputs in terms of its content, and it will go after the right people. That's what we've found time and time again over those few years, as I mentioned, even since Advantage Plus has been out, which has only been a couple of years. That's what we've found to be the best performing. So people tend to muck around with, I've got to target these people and get really granular here and all that sort of thing. That's just not working anymore. There's no point doing that. It's a waste of time. You're way better off using your ads and changing your ads and creating new ads more frequently than mucking around with your audience targeting, because that's only a very small percentage, if anything, when you get more granular. In fact, it's probably more detrimental because you're excluding people that you otherwise would be able to target with Advantage Plus or something broader. So that's what I wanted to mention with lookalike audiences and audiences generally on Meta. It's really important that you understand how that works and understand where to put your focus. As I say, I advise my clients, it's like 99% goes into the actual ad content, the actual ad itself. Okay, don't obsess with the audience. Don't unnecessarily obsess with the audience, because it can hold people back from pulling the trigger and just getting going. So that's what I want to share with you. I hope obviously you got value from it. It provides some context. Maybe you're in that position, maybe think about those things yourself, and just wanted to share that with you and hope it provides some value. So if you did, I'd love a like, I'd love a subscribe. Of course, more videos coming like this all the time. But other than that, have a really great day. Obviously, thanks for watching till the end here, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.